For over a century, the Israeli-Palestinian conflict has torn apart families, destroyed communities, and left millions of Palestinians displaced from their homeland. To truly understand this conflict, we must go back to the roots, back to the late 1800s when the seeds of this tragedy were first planted.
In the late 1800s, Palestine was part of the Ottoman Empire. It was a diverse land where Muslims, Christians, and Jews lived side by side in relative peace. But in Europe, a new ideology was gaining traction: Zionism. Founded by Theodor Herzl, Zionism called for the establishment of a Jewish state in Palestine, motivated by growing European anti-Semitism. Zionists sought to create a homeland in Palestine, but this vision disregarded the indigenous Palestinian population, who had lived on the land for generations. The Zionist movement aimed to settle Jews from Europe in Palestine, often with the support of Western powers. In 1917, during World War I, Britain issued the Balfour Declaration, supporting the creation of a national home for the Jewish people in Palestine. This declaration was made without consulting the indigenous Palestinian Arabs, who made up 90% of the population at the time. When Britain took control of Palestine after the war, the seeds of conflict were firmly planted. Between 1917 and 1947, Jewish immigration to Palestine increased dramatically under British rule, and with it came growing tensions between Jewish settlers and Palestinians. The Palestinians feared that they were losing their land and their future. Protests broke out, leading to violent clashes and increasing instability in the region.
In 1947, the United Nations proposed a partition plan, dividing Palestine into separate Jewish and Arab states. Despite being in the majority, Palestinians were offered less than half of their land, which they rejected. In 1948, Israel declared its independence, and this marked the beginning of the Nakba, or catastrophe, for the Palestinian people. Over 750,000 Palestinians were forcibly expelled from their homes by Zionist militias and Israeli forces. Entire villages were destroyed, and Palestinians became refugees in neighboring countries or were internally displaced. To this day, the right of return for these refugees is denied by Israel.
In 1967, Israel occupied the West Bank, Gaza Strip, and East Jerusalem during the Six-Day War. This marked the beginning of Israel's military occupation of Palestinian land, which continues to this day. Under international law, these territories are recognized as illegally occupied, yet Israel has continued to expand its control through the construction of illegal settlements. Over the past decades, Israel has built hundreds of settlements on Palestinian land, home to over 600,000 Israeli settlers. These settlements are connected by roads that Palestinians are often forbidden to use. The wall that Israel built to separate itself from the West Bank cuts deeply into Palestinian territory, further isolating Palestinian communities and restricting their movement.
For Palestinians, life under occupation is one of constant fear, humiliation, and struggle. In the West Bank, Palestinians face daily harassment from Israeli soldiers and settlers. They are forced to navigate through checkpoints, have their homes demolished, and face arbitrary arrests. The blockade of Gaza has created a humanitarian disaster, with over 2 million people living in what has been described as the world's largest open-air prison. Israel's repeated military assaults on Gaza have killed thousands of civilians, including women and children. Entire neighborhoods have been leveled, and essential infrastructure, such as hospitals and schools, have been destroyed. Yet despite this, the world remains largely silent.
Over the years, there have been numerous attempts at peace, from the Oslo Accords to the Camp David negotiations, but each time the peace process has failed. Why? Because peace cannot be achieved while Israel continues to occupy and settle Palestinian land, while millions of Palestinians are denied basic human rights, and while the international community fails to hold Israel accountable.
Today, more and more people around the world are standing up for Palestinian rights. The Boycott, Divestment and Sanctions (BDS) movement calls for economic and cultural pressure on Israel to end its occupation and recognize Palestinian rights. Activists from all corners of the globe are joining forces, demanding an end to the apartheid system that denies Palestinians their dignity and freedom.
This is not just a conflict, this is an occupation. This is about justice, human rights, and the right of the Palestinian people to live freely on their land. It's time for the world to take a stand, to end the silence, and to support the Palestinian cause for freedom and dignity. Every voice matters. Every action counts. Stand with Palestine.